Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Responding to a major Indian escalation along the line of control, Pakistani forces have killed 9 Indian troops and destroyed 2 bunkers in occupied Kashmir. Military spokesman Major General Asif Ghafoor said Pakistani forces retaliated after Indian forces opened unprovoked fire, martyring 1 soldier and 5 civilians. He said 2 other Pakistani soldiers and 3 civilians were wounded in the Indian attack on the Jura, Nuseri and Shahkot sectors along the line of control. Major General Asif Ghafoor said Indian Army would always get a befitting response to ceasefire violations on the line of control. Military spokesman Major General Asif Ghafoor said Pakistan would continue to protect innocent civilians living along the line of control. He said Indian forces would pay an unbearable cost for their attacks. The unprovoked attack follows a series of threatening statements by Indian ministers and military commanders. But Ghafoor said Pakistan would continue to expose Indian lies and preparations for a false flag operation. India's escalation along the line of control comes ahead of the scheduled local elections in occupied Jammu on Thursday. The polls have been boycotted by all Kashmiri and Indian political parties to protest India's revocation of the special status of occupied Kashmir on August the 5th. The Indian curfew and communications blackout of occupied Kashmir is now in its 77th day. For more on this developing story, we are joined live from Islamabad by political analyst Shahzad Chaudhary, a former Air Vice Marshal of Pakistan Air Force. So thank you for your time at Indus News. India's line of control violations are the biggest escalation since August the 5th. Is this a one-off, or do we expect more trouble?
No, I think this has become an Indian routine to engage and indulge in this kind of belligerent attitude towards Pakistan. Look, every passing month and every passing week continues to increase in intensity in terms of the violations of the line of control. This is against the understanding in 2003 when India and Pakistan were meant to agree to a peace agreement, and it actually stayed for about 10 years. Ever since, in the last about 7-8 years, it has continuously been on the increase, and especially under the BJP, and especially in the last few months, you've seen an escalation of an unparalleled order. And the reasons are very obvious. Rather than look at the plight of the Kashmiris who continue to suffer under their occupation, a forced occupation of 8 million Kashmiris, they want to divert the attention of the world and of everybody else to an escalation on the line of conflict, which of course Pakistan does not desire. But Pakistan must respond to when such provocations occur. And especially when you target our civilians and our soldiers, then Pakistan must respond. And that is a response that Pakistan has given. And that is what India must expect in terms of what Pakistan will do in case such saber-rattling and such aggression continues across the line of control.
Mr. Shahzad, Pakistan has repeatedly warned that India has been planning false flag operations to provoke the kind of escalation we saw earlier this year. What do you think are the India's motivations?
Well, look, false flag will take place if it takes place in its own borders. Pakistan is always wary of Indian design. And Indian design has been for quite some time, like ever since 5th August, in fact, when they revoked the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution to bring Kashmir directly under their control in New Delhi. Ever since, there's been this effort on the Indian side to somehow pin the blame on Pakistan for what it has in terms of violations carried out inside India or inside the occupied Kashmir, which was against the requirements of the UNSC resolutions. So I feel that that is what they've been doing, that is what they've been trying. Pakistan is wary of that, but come what may, Pakistan knows how to defend itself. I think we've shown that in February, and we'll continue to do that. Our defense forces are in the state of operational preparedness, where they have the capacity and the ability to take care of any such provocation, if it is in the name of a false flag or if it just comes out of as a simple violation of the LOC.
So, Mr. Shehzad, Pakistan has mounted a powerful diplomatic campaign against India's rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir, particularly after the revocation of Article 370. Prime Minister Imran Khan raised the issue vehemently at the United Nations General Assembly. What do you think happens to be the role or the practical measures from the international community in this scenario?
Well, the international community needs to continue to be sensitized to the plight of the Kashmiris. Our first effort and goal is, of course, to make sure that somehow Kashmiris get the freedom to breathe, freedom to express themselves, freedom to live as human beings, in fact. That is what they've been denied since August 5, and ever since the Indian Army has moved there in very, very large numbers, beyond the 750,000 that were already there. They're now up by another 150,000 to almost 1 million people there, and that is just to take care of the 9 million Kashmiris, unarmed Kashmiris, who've been only wanting what the world conscience had identified for them in terms of the UNSC resolutions, through the UNSC resolutions for a plebiscite and a self-determination. So that is their only fault. I think it's the job of Pakistan, it's the job of the Kashmiris diaspora the world over to continue to sensitize the world about the plight of the Kashmiris, one, and secondly, to continue to say and demand that they be given the right, the human rights, and the right to self-determination and plebiscite. And I think that is what shall be the first step towards establishing long-term peace between India and Pakistan. That is how we can, both countries, begin to learn to live as normal neighbors. There's a great amount of potential in the two countries, only if India can stop being the hegemon that it has become, and it is trying to show itself to be. And in terms of a very aggressive assertiveness, aggression, and provocative in many ways, that's an area that we need to work on and bring that to the notice of the world.
Vice Marshal Mr. Shehzad Chaudhary, thanks for your time at Indus News. Now we'll talk on this particular developing story to Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi, who has joined us from Islamabad, defense analyst. Thank you for your time. Another act of Indian aggression, another ceasefire violation by Indian forces deliberately targeting the civilian population. So what's your take on this?
First thing is that this is the only language that Indians understand. We have tried our best to remain peaceful. We have extended the hands of friendship, and they have always, given us negative reactions. Why are they doing it? The basic, we must ponder on this thing that after 76 days of curfew and blackout and all those, things that they are doing to the Kashmiris, they haven't been able to achieve their phase 1 of the objective, and that objective was to martyr or eliminate the leadership and the youth who were carrying out this freedom movement in occupied Kashmir. So in my own assessment, it was a job of 10 to 15 days for such a large force to take to control 450 to 500 maximum people according to their own numbers, which were carrying out all these freedom movements. So after 76 days, they have not lifted the curfew, means that they have failed in their objective 1, the first phase. And out of frustration, they are doing all these things, the one which they are doing today, which they have done today also. But I think this is, one mistake after another mistake, and they'll keep on belittling themselves at international forums. They will keep on belittling themselves in the eyes of the Indians themselves. And what I can see is that all these events are leading towards independence of Kashmir, Kashmir joining Pakistan, and getting out of the clutches of India. So it is their own mistake, and they'll have a bitter lesson after every episode. Yes.
So, Mr. Lodi, as you just mentioned, one mistake after another by India. What do you think is the purpose of all these aggressive and provocative actions on the part of India?
Actually, they're trying their best to assimilate whatever they've already done. After revoking 370 and also 335A. Now, of course, their next step would have been that after putting a lot of fear in the hearts of Kashmiris and after getting complete control over the freedom movement, then they would have tried to change the demographic situation of the country. They would have tried to bring more, maybe some investments, but they are failing in their, even the first, part that is controlling the things. And they have now realized that the morale of Kashmiris is directly related to the way Pakistan is standing with them. And they would like to hurt Pakistan in a way so that Pakistan gets subdued and the Kashmiri morale goes down. That is not going to happen, inshallah. That is what they are trying out of frustration. But this is all, they planned something else, and because of the reactions, events are taking them in some other direction, and that direction, as I said earlier in my own assessment, will lead to emancipation of Kashmiris from their atrocities.
General Naeem Khalid Lodi, thanks for being with us. It's time for a short break. More stories to follow. Stay with us. Welcome back. A U.S. congressional hearing on South Asia with focus on occupied Kashmir will be held on Tuesday in Washington. In a statement, Chairman of the House Subcommittee on Asia, Brad Sherman, said the hearing will review humanitarian situation in the valley. The statement said hearing will focus on the valley where politicians are arrested and daily life and communications are blacked out. It said hearing will also review the humanitarian situation in Kashmir and whether Kashmiris have adequate supplies of basic necessities. Meanwhile, the New Delhi's curfew and the communications blackout has entered its 77th day. People of Kashmir continue to observe shutdown as a silent protest against India's brutal actions in the territory. A retired Major General of British Army, Jonathan David Shaw, has said it is time for the world to give more respect to Pakistan. In an article, Shaw wrote, British royal couple's visit to Pakistan shows how the country has transformed its internal security situation. The retired army official said Pakistan has established internal order under military command of General Qamar Javed Bajwa. He said Pakistan is working as a vital regional player and has arrested all militants on US watch list. Shaw said Pakistan has made huge efforts against terrorism in past decade and now is not the time to ask for more from the country. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has sent a request to the EU for an extension to Brexit, but without his signature. The request was accompanied by a second letter by Johnson saying he believes that a delay will be a mistake. Johnson said he will not negotiate a further delay with the EU leaders. He vowed to introduce legislation needed to implement his agreement in Parliament next week. The Prime Minister was required by law to ask the EU for an extension to the October 31st deadline after losing a Commons vote yesterday. Conservative lawmaker Oliver Letwin's proposal got 322 votes in favour and 306 against. The amendment has opened a window to push Brexit until January 31st next year. Meanwhile, European Commission President Donald Tusk has said he has received Johnson's request and will respond after consulting the EU leaders. Turkey says one of its soldiers has been killed in an attack by the Kurdish YPG militia in northeastern Syria. In a statement, Turkey's defense ministry said another soldier was wounded in the attack on a patrol in the town of Tal Abyad. Earlier, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will crush Kurdish fighters in Syria if they don't withdraw as per the ceasefire agreement. Turkey has agreed with the US to pause its military offensive in northeastern Syria for 5 days. The US says all of the nearly 1,000 troops withdrawing from Syria are expected to move to western Iraq. Speaking to reporters, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the move will help Iraq defend itself from the ISIS militants. Defense Secretary Esper said he discussed the US troops withdrawal with his French counterpart and the NATO Secretary General. He said there is a consensus between France and the US to jointly defeat the ISIS militants.
Yes, I had a discussion last week with my French counterpart, and I had a conversation with the NATO Secretary General. We both agreed on the importance of continuing the Defeat ISIS campaign, and we agreed to have a meeting on it this week in Brussels.
Mali's armed forces have killed 50 militants in an operation near the Burkina Faso border. In a statement, the military said it has rescued 36 soldiers captured by the ISIS and Al-Qaeda-linked militants in September attacks. The military said it has conducted the operation along the French-Bahraini forces. It said the operation has also confirmed presence of women in the militant groups. Earlier in September, 38 Malian soldiers were killed near the border. Military posts at Bolkesi and Mondoro were targeted in the deadly attacks by the militants. Mali has witnessed conflict since 2012 after an ethnic uprising by Tuaregs in the north. In Lebanon, a government-allied party has quit the coalition after third day of protests across the country against tax increases and corruption. In a televised speech, Lebanese Forces Party head Samir Yahya said the government is unable to control the situation. Shaken by the anti-government protests, the resignation of 4 ministers has given a major blow to the ruling coalition. But the resignations will not collapse the 30-member cabinet. The protesters in Beirut celebrated the news of the coalition's party's resignation, calling on other blocs to leave the government as well. Prime Minister Saad Hariri has given a task to coalition partners to find ways to deal with the current crisis. The demonstrators are demanding a sweeping overhaul of Lebanon's political system, citing grievances from austerity measures to poor infrastructure. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington remains committed to peace and stability in Afghanistan. His statement comes after 70 people were killed in a mosque blast in Afghanistan. Pompeo said the United States will continue its fight against terrorism. He added that U.S. stands by people of Afghanistan who only want peace and a future free of violence. The Afghan government has blamed Taliban for the explosion, which the group rejected, saying Afghan forces' mortar hit the mosque. The Spanish government has dismissed calls from the Catalonia's regional president to negotiate after days of protests. Demonstrations turned violent after pro-independence Catalan leaders were sentenced. Catalonia's president, Quim Torra, had requested talks with Madrid, saying the unrest did not reflect the peaceful nature of the independence movement. At a press conference, he said the Spanish government must sit on the negotiating table to resolve the crisis. Responding, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said that Torra must first unequivocally condemn the unprecedented unrest. The Interior Ministry spokesman said that over 300 people have been detained since the protests started. On the 6th day of the protest, demonstrators clashed with police, which forced the personnel to retreat. Switzerland is holding its national elections today to elect new members of both the houses of the Federal Assembly. Multiple independent surveys show climate change has displaced migration as the top priority among the Swiss electorate. Opinion polls show Swiss People's Party will remain the largest parliamentary party with over 20% of the vote. But the support is down from the 29% the governing party garnered in 2015. The Green Party, which won just over 7% in 2015, is now backed by nearly 11% of the voters. The Sotomo Political Research Institute said opinion polls point to a green wave during the vote. Clashes have erupted for the 20th consecutive weekend between Hong Kong police and the protesters. Police fired tear gas at thousands of protesters, vandalizing subway stations and shops in flash mob rallies across the city. Police fired tear gas at protesters who wore face masks in defiance of emergency laws that have a penalty of up to a year in prison. The demonstrators threw petrol bombs at a police station's iron gate and inside the compound. Protesters bashed Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam for failing to protect their freedom. Hong Kong has been battered by months of massive protests ignited by a controversial extradition bill. A team of Egyptian archaeologists have discovered a cache of 30 coffins. This is the first discovery of its kind in over a century. This report has the details.
Egyptian authorities revealed details of the 30 coffins in the southern city of Luxor. Each casket has a mummy inside, which archaeologists say are in good condition.
The question is, what is the story of the cachet? A cachet means something hidden, something that the ancient Egyptians intentionally decided to hide. But from whom?
It has been determined the cachet is around 3,000-year-old. Because the coffins are built for men, women, and children, archaeologists theorize they were made for a priest's family.
This will enrich our knowledge as Egyptologists about the belief of the afterlife, about the workshops that make all these beautiful scenes, the color, the religious scenes. All the Book of the Dead is for everyone, for the common people, for a king or for a priest. And this is why I believe this discovery is very important.
Such discoveries can revive the country's ailing tourism sector, which was badly hit by the unrest caused by the toppling of Hosni Mubarak in 2011.
New York City is known for many things, including its art. The Museum of Modern Art has been at the center of the Big Apple's dynamic art scene. The museum is set to reopen with an extensive makeover later this month. Details in this report.
New York's heralded MoMA reopens on 21st October after a multi-million-dollar makeover. MoMA, which moved here in 1939, has undergone remodeling 4 times to cope with the growing collection and increased footfall. This time, the layout reflects the philosophy of the museum's first director, Alfred Barr.
When the Museum of Modern Art in 1939 built its first building, what distinguished that building most from previous institutions was it wasn't set in a park, and it wasn't set up a flight of steps.
The upgrade cost $450 million. It means the museum will be able to exhibit around 2,400 works a year compared to an average of 1,500. For the first time, artworks will be displayed by theme rather than time period.
This notion of democratizing the museum, of making that whole ground floor visible everywhere and free, is very much part of this sort of character that we wanted to bring out together.
For people wanting to see Pablo Picasso's iconic works, his Water Lilies and the Ladies of Avignon will always be on show.
Australia's Qantas airline has achieved a milestone by flying the longest non-stop passenger flight from New York to Sydney. The flight took 19 hours and 16 minutes to reach the destination. Qantas hopes to parlay this test into commercial success. This is the first of 3 ultra-long-haul journeys planned by the airline this year. Just 49 people traveled on the Boeing to minimize the weight on board and give the plane sufficient fuel without refueling. Qantas CEO Alan Joyce called it a really historic moment for both the airline and world aviation. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Thank you for watching. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus.